I do.
So, like the introduction said, I'm Andre. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Spry Health. I'm also a practicing anesthesiologist. And I'm here today to talk to you about Spry Health, introduce you all, tell you a little bit about who we are, what we're doing, the kinds of challenges and ideas we're trying to get our arms around, and hope that we can, excite or interest at least some of you, if not all of you, in joining us in defining the future of medicine through technology, much as we're talking about today. So, we scroll. All right, so we are a sensor-based digital health disease management platform that's really focused on improving the outcomes for our most vulnerable, our sickest patients. And the way we do that is we use this device called the Loop to capture multiple vital sign parameters. Those include continuously and passively, and those include heart rate, respiratory rate, pulse oximetry, blood pressure, and arterial CO2. And we've got a demo over there if you guys want to check it out a little later. But to me, this is really exciting stuff. When I started talking to Spry, and I still am, just sort of fascinated by essentially taking the continuous data streams that I'm used to using in the operating room and bringing it to the living room. It's really, really cool. Of course, it's just not that simple, right? And I think we've heard a lot of people echo the same sentiments where the devil's in the details, and how we get it done is something we're really being mindful about. So, to give you an idea of one of the projects we are really working on, and also reaching out to the physician community, academic community practitioners, is really taking clinical guidelines and adapting them to a continuous, dynamic, contextual data stream. Right. So, for example, this is the newest guideline. One of the newest guidelines that was published by the ACC, AHA, HFSA, it's a mouthful, talking about heart failure. And for the first time, for patients that are stage A, increased risk for heart failure, there's a recommendation to keep their target blood pressure at 130/80, right? Pretty simple. But when we start to think about how we take that recommendation and use that to create algorithms and rule sets which will then manage that data that we're connecting, things get a little fuzzy, right? What does a target mean? Is it the mean? Is it the mode? Is it the median? What is an acceptable deviation from 130/80? Is it 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%? How about, is it just at rest? What about with activity? What about with different, states of being, joy, fear, sadness? And, what is this really mean in the sense of the digital health future that we have? It's tough. And most importantly, what's the acceptable number for it to be to bother the physician at home when it's nighttime and they just want to rest, right? Because we've heard a lot about data fatigue, alarm fatigue, and so how to create a really, thoughtful process that limits the amount of data that is transmitted, but really provides meaningful data when we do reach out and say, hey, maybe you guys should check this patient out. There's something going wrong. But the idea here is that eventually providers will know who they need to see on any given day, and actually, just as importantly, who they don't need to see. So that's, I think, a pain point that is really significant for everyone. So that is one of the big ideas that we're working on. How do we just take all of these static guidelines and make them dynamic? And it's a real example of how we are stuck in this transition period between old healthcare and new healthcare, right? This guideline makes sense for the way we've historically practice medicine and the way it's currently delivered today. But if we were to start from scratch and think up a whole new way of delivering care, we probably wouldn't come up with this, right? It would be something totally different. So we have to bridge that gap. And assuming we can do that, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So there are regulatory and reimbursement challenges that we've already touched upon that are significant hurdles for any organization, let alone a startup. If you bring a novel device to the FDA, you're going to have some unique challenges through the regulatory process. Lack of predicate devices make it a little bit hard to fit into a predetermined box that they have. And in general, the FDA has a pretty high bar for patient safety, but they actually have a pretty low bar for efficacy, right? They'll approve it if it won't kill anybody, but they don't really care if it really makes a difference. The problem is the other side of the coin, the payers, they care about efficacy, right? They want to know how much is this going to cost us, and if we're spending this money, what does it exactly do? So they ask for studies that link a product to how a benefit will be delivered. And ideally, you'll have some systematic review inclusion studies that you can show a payer to say, hey, this stuff is great, but to get into a Cochrane review takes some time. And that's just not feasible for emerging technologies that are looking to be adopted quickly. And then if you can actually identify some coding or have a code created for you, doesn't mean it's going to be covered. And if they agree to cover it, that doesn't mean they'll reimburse it either, right? So it's kind of an interesting situation to be in. And so the reality is that the time frame for both of these areas is longer than the runway of the usual startup. And to then even further complicate the matter, what we've also talked about is the actual delivery integration, right? How are we going to deploy this in a way that makes sense? The healthcare technology of tomorrow will go nowhere if it doesn't integrate with how healthcare is practiced today. And we need to be mindful of that as we create technologies that we try to bring to market. So we are really studying different healthcare organizations, different systems of care, and creating a set of criteria that will allow us to integrate into existing models of care that will support our adoption and then drive it further as we can show outcomes. And of course, clinical practitioners. I think it was Steve who mentioned that most doctors don't have enough time in the day to try something new, especially if they don't know if they're going to get paid for it, and they have to train all of their staff, and they have to really take the time to integrate this into their practice. The workflow disruption is a major concern for pretty much any practitioner when you've got a huge clinic and you don't know how you're going to get through your day. So, wrong way. The Achilles heel of healthcare tomorrow is actually healthcare today, right? But we're stuck with it. And we have to really think of ways to move forward while preserving the current systems that are in place. As we mentioned, the clinical practice guidelines are problematic, regulatory and reimbursement life cycles are long, integration with current healthcare systems is critical, and we believe that this combination of factors is what's kept a real compelling solution from being widely adopted thus far, right? So that is what we're up against. That, on the other hand, though, is balanced by the fact that I think we're also here today because we believe that the future of medicine is through technology. And we're really excited about being part of that. So I'd like to invite all of you to participate with us. We are reaching out to our physician communities to help think through all of these issues in a mindful way so we can actually deliver some value to our patients, our healthcare delivery systems, and ourselves as well. So thank you very much. Thank you to the California ACC Tech Symposium for having us here. We'd love to talk to whoever is interested, and come check out our demo, get your vital signs checked, and yeah, thanks again. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Any questions from the audience? Okay. Oh, well, yeah, we have one. We're gonna bring you a mic right now.
I always have questions. That's what I do for a living, right?
Great.
I explore things. So we work at the Right Care Initiative to really drive on that blood pressure number. And so far we haven't come across accurate technology to wirelessly transmit that easily, passively by the patient. So it looks like what you're doing is really attractive. Can you talk about the accuracy and where you are with FDA approval, or?
Okay, sure. So in terms of the accuracy, it kind of depends on which stage of the prototype that you're talking about. On a recently published white paper that we have put out, the study was based on a low-risk ambulatory population of an earlier prototype model, at which point we showed that our blood pressure accuracy is equivalent to what you would find over the counter at like a Rite Aid, to one of those inflatable ones. But right now we're actually running a second clinical trial in high-risk operating room setting where we are validating our data against invasive A-lines and all the multiple parameters coming out of an operating room. And so our accuracy thus far, while we're still running that trial, is definitely improved. But the great thing about it is that we're using that data to teach our algorithms to be more accurate. So we expect that by the time this trial is concluded, we'll be close to A-line accuracy. No problem. And as for the FDA, that's a very long answer. So. So for pulse rate and pulse oximetry, the question was, so what about the other parameters, right? We only discussed blood pressure. So for heart rate, respiratory rate, and pulse oximetry, we are at standard for medical devices. We are within their standard deviations. We're actually more accurate when it comes to pulse oximetry and heart rate.
Okay. Yeah, we'll finish up there for now. So we'll thank you very much. Yeah.